sow them, and in the fall you harvest them, or you reap your harvest. And in the case of the Grim Reaper, he reaps a harvest of souls. That's why he carries around the sickle, because he's going to harvest, he's going to reap that harvest of souls. And sometimes he's interchangeable with the idea or the allegory of death. I'm sorry, not death, but time. Because inevitably, inexorably, in all of our futures, with enough time, we die. So death in the future can sometimes be conflated a little bit. In this particular book, the description of the Ghost of Christmas future is so much to me like the descriptions of the Dementors in Prisoner of Azkaban, if you are a Harry Potter fan. So I'm just going to assume that J.K. Rowling, along with the entire rest of the universe, read a lot of Christmas Carol when she was a kid, and was influenced by it. So let's just jump in. The Phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon his knee, for in the very air through which the spirit moved, it seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment, which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand. But for this, it would have been difficult to detach its figure from the night, and separate it from the darkness by which it was surrounded. He felt that it was tall and stately when it came beside him, and that its mysterious presence filled him with a solemn dread. He knew no more, for the spirit neither spoke nor moved. And all of this is very appropriate, because the future is very opaque to us. It's very mysterious to us. If the future was something that were obvious, then, he'd be real talkative, like the Ghost of Christmas Present. So that makes sense. The spirit answered not, but pointed, I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come, said Scrooge. The spirit answered not, but pointed onward with its hands. You're about to show me shadows of the things that have not happened, but will happen in the time before us, Scrooge pursued. Is that so, spirit? The upper portion of the garment was contracted for an instant in its folds, as if the spirit had inclined its head. That was the only answer he received. In other words, it nodded. That's just Dickens' really wordy way of saying that. Although well used to ghostly company by this time, Scrooge feared the silent shape so much that his legs trembled beneath him, but he found that he could hardly stand when he prepared to follow it. The spirit paused a moment as observing his condition and giving him time to recover. But Scrooge was all the worse for this. It thrilled him with a vague, uncertain horror to know that behind the dusky shroud there were ghostly eyes intently fixed upon him, while he, though he stretched his own to the utmost, could see nothing but a spectral hand and one great heap of black. Ghost of the future, he exclaimed, I fear you more than any spectre I have seen. But as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live to be another man from what I was, I am prepared to bear you company and do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me? It gave him no reply. The hand was pointed straight before them. Lead on, said Scrooge, lead on. The night is waning fast, and it is precious time to me, I know. Lead on, spirit. So this is a little bit of character growth of, Scrooge going from, the first ghost, oh, I've got the wrong shoes, to the second ghost, like, all right, I'm ready, to now he's almost eagerly seeking it, even though he fears it. The phantom moved away as it had come towards him. Scrooge followed in the shadow of its dress, which bore him up, he thought, and carried him away. They scarcely seemed to enter the city, for the city rather seemed to spring up about them, and encompass them of its own act. But there they were, in the heart of it, on 'change, amongst the merchants, who hurried up and down and chinked the money in their pockets, and conversed in groups, and looked at their watches, and trifled thoughtfully with their great gold seals, and so forth, as Scrooge had seen them often. So they're in the London equivalent of Wall Street, basically. They're in a financial district. The spirit stopped beside one little knot of businessmen. Observing that the hand was pointed to them, Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk. No, said a great fat man with a monster's chin. I don't know much about it either way. I only know he's dead. Well, when did he die? Inquired another. Last night, I believed. Why? What was the matter with him? Asked a third, taking a vast quantity of snuff out of a very large snuff box. I thought he'd never die. God knows, said the first with a yawn. What's he done with the money? Asked a red-faced gentleman with a pendulous excrescence on the end of his nose that shook like the gills of a turkey cock. I haven't heard, said the man with the large chin, yawning again. Left it to his company, perhaps. Hasn't left it to me. That's all I know. This pleasantry was received with a general laugh. Okay, tiny pause. Pendulous excrescence is a booger. The guy's got a booger hanging down from his nose, and it's jiggling back and forth like the pendulum of a clock. It's so gross. It's so funny. It's so Dickens. Okay. It's likely to be a very cheap funeral, said the same speaker, for upon my life, I don't know of anybody to go to it. Suppose we make up a party and volunteer. I don't mind going if a lunch is provided, observed the gentleman with the excrescence on his nose. But I must be fed if I make one. Another laugh. Well, I am the most disinterested among you after all, said the first speaker, for I never wear black gloves, and I never eat lunch. But I'll offer to go if anybody else will. And I kind of think of it, I'm not at all sure I wasn't his most particular friend, for we used to stop and speak whenever we met. Bye-bye. Speakers and listeners strolled away and mixed with other groups. Scrooge knew the men and looked toward the spirit for an explanation. The phantom glided on into a street. Its finger pointed to two persons meeting. Scrooge listened again, thinking that the explanation might lie here. He knew these men also perfectly. They were men of business, very wealthy, and of great importance. He had made a point, always, of standing well in their esteem. In a business point of view, that is, strictly in a business point of view. How are you? Said one. How are you? Returned the other. Well, said the first, old Scratch has got his own at last, eh? So I'm told, returned the second. Cold, isn't it? Seasonable for Christmas time. You're not a skater, I suppose. No, something else to think of. Good morning. Not another word. That was their meeting, their conversation, and their parting. Scrooge was at first inclined to be surprised that the spirit should attach importance to conversations apparently so trivial. But feeling assured that they must have had some hidden purpose, he set himself to consider what it was likely to be. They could scarcely be supposed to have any bearing on the death of Jacob, his old partner, for that was past, and this ghost province is the future. Nor could he think of anyone immediately connected with himself to whom he could apply them. But nothing doubting that to whomsoever they applied, they had some latent moral for his own improvement, he resolved to treasure up every word he heard and everything he saw, and especially to observe the shadow of himself when it appeared. For he had an expectation that the conduct of his future self would give him the clue he missed, and would render the solution of these riddles easy. And hopefully you're getting the hint that the narrator is giving us. These are all guys that he knows. These are all guys that he was associates with. Like the person who's they're talking about, it's him. But he's like a little too dense to pick up on it. He also doesn't want to pick up on it. So he's in good faith. He's trying to learn a lesson for it. He can't figure out who it is, and he's looking about for his future self. He looked about that very place for his own image, but another man stood in his accustomed corner, and though the clock pointed to the usual time of day for being there, he saw no likeness of himself among the multitudes that poured in through the porch. It gave him little surprise, however, for he'd been revolving in his mind a change of life, and thought and hope he saw his new-born resolutions carried out in this. Quiet and dark beside him stood the phantom, with its outstretched hand. When he roused himself from his thoughtful quest, he fancied from the turn of the hand and its situation in reference to himself, that the unseen eyes were looking at him keenly. It made him shudder, feel very cold. They left the busy scene and went into an obscure part of the town, where Scrooge had never penetrated before. although he recognized its situation and its bad repute. The ways were foul and narrow, the shops and houses wretched, the people half-naked, drunken, slipshod, ugly. Alleys and archways, like so many cesspools, disgorged their offenses of smell and dirt and life upon the straggling streets, and the whole quarter reeked with crime, with filth and misery. Far in this den of infamous resort there was a low-browed beetling shop below a penthouse roof, where iron, old rags, bottles, bones, and greasy offal were bought. Upon the floor within were piled up heaps of rusty keys, nails, chains, hinges, files, scales, weights, and refuse iron of all kind. Secrets that few would like to scrutinize were bred and hidden in mountains of unseemly rags, masses of corrupted fat, and sepulchres of bones. Sitting in among the wares he dealt by a charcoal stove made of old bricks was a gray-haired rascal some 70 years of age, who had screened himself from the cold air without by a frowsy curtaining of miscellaneous tatters hung upon a line, and smoked his pipe in all the luxury of calm retirement. Scrooge and the Phantom came into the presence of this man just as a woman with a heavy bundle slunk into the shop. But she'd scarcely entered when another woman, similarly laden, came in too, and she was closely followed by a man in faded black, who was no less startled by the sight of them than they had been upon the recognition of each other. After a short period of blank astonishment, in which the old man with the pipe had joined them, they all three burst into a laugh. "Let the charwoman alone to be first," cried she who had entered first. "Let the laundress alone to be second, and let the undertaker's man alone to be the third. Look here, old Joe, here's a chance if we haven't all three met here without meaning it." So, this neighborhood is disgusting, but it describes several neighborhoods in London in the period that this book is based on, in the period that Dickens lived there. There was just insufficient infrastructure for the millions and millions and millions of people that moved from the countryside into London during this time period. And, one of the insufficient systems is any kind of like public cleaning and running water, plumbing. So these cesspools of filth and these alleyways of filth, like this, truly, truly, truly disgusting. And the shop that we're inside is a pawnbroker shop, but the guy's a fence. So this is a guy that you go to if you're going to sell scrap stuff or also stolen goods. The description of the piles of junk that is, around there implies it's just crawling with vermin and filth. This is not a very pleasant place. So when these three people run into each other, when they're walking in, they're all embarrassed to be seen going in there, but they're also all aware of the fact of like, well, I'm coming in here, but you're coming in here too. So no judgment, because whatever reason I'm here, probably it's the same reason you're here. But that's the reaction. All right. "You couldn't have met in a better place," said old Joe, removing his pipe from his mouth. "Come into the parlor. You made free of it long ago, The other two ain't strangers. Stop till I shut up the door of the shop. Ah, it squeaks. There ain't such a rusty bit of metal in the place as his own hinges, I believe. And I'm sure there's no such old bones here as mine. Ha, ha. We're all suitable to our calling. We're well matched. Come into the parlor. Come into the parlor." The parlor was the space behind the screen of rags. The old man raked the fire together with an old stair rod, and having trimmed his smoky lamp, for it was night, with the stem of his pipe, put it in his mouth again. While he did this, the woman who had already spoken threw her bundle on the floor and sat in a flaunting manner on the stool, crossing her elbows on her knees and looking with a bold defiance at the other two. "What odds, then? What odds, Mrs. Dilber?" said the woman. "Every person has a right to take care of himself. He always did." "That's true indeed," said the laundress. "No man more so." "Why, then, don't stand staring as if he is afraid, woman. Who's the wiser? We're not going to pick holes in each other's coats, I suppose." "No, indeed," said Mrs. Dilber and the man together. "And we should hope not." Again, this is a euphemism for we're not going to judge each other for showing up here with stolen goods, because we're all doing it. Well, very well then, cried the woman. That's enough. Who's the worse for the loss of a few things like these? Not a dead man, I suppose. No, indeed, said Mrs. Dilber, laughing. If he wanted to keep him after he is dead, wicked old screw, pursued the woman, why wasn't he natural in his lifetime? If he had been, he'd have had somebody to look after him when he was struck with death, instead of lying gasping out his last there alone by himself. It's the truest word that was ever spoke, said Mrs. Dilber. It's a judgment on him. I wish it was a little heavier judgment, replied the woman, and it should have been, you may depend upon it, if I could have laid my hands on anything else. Open that bundle, old Joe, and let me know the value of it. Speak out plain. I'm not afraid to be the first, nor afraid for them to see it. We know pretty well that we were helping ourselves before we met here, I believe. It's no sin. Open the bundle, Joe. But the gallantry of her friends would not allow of this, and the man in faded black, mounting the breech first, produced his plunder. It was not extensive. A seal or two, a pencil case, pair of sleeve buttons, and a brooch of no great value were all. They were severally examined and appraised by old Joe, who chalked the sums he was disposed to give for each upon the wall, and added them up into a total when he found that there was nothing more to come. That's your account, said Joe, and I wouldn't give another sixpence if I was to be boiled for not doing it. Who's next? Mrs. Dilber was next. Sheets and towels, a little wearing apparel, 2 old-fashioned silver teaspoons, a pair of sugar tongs, and a few boots. Her account was stated on the wall in the same manner. I always give too much to ladies. It's a weakness of mine, and that's the way I ruin myself, said old Joe. There's your account. If you asked me for another penny and made it an open question, I'd repent of being so liberal and knock off half a crown. And now undo my bundle, Joe, said the first woman. Joe went down on his knees for the greater convenience of opening it, and having unfastened a great many knots, dragged out a large and heavy roll of some dark stuff. What do you call this? Said Joe. Bed curtains. Ah, returned the woman, laughing and leaning forward on her crossed arms. Bed curtains. You don't mean to say you took 'em down, rings and all, with him lying there, said Joe. Yes, I do, replied the woman. Why not? You're born to make your fortune, said Joe, and you'll certainly do it. Well, I certainly shan't hold my hand when I can get anything in it by reaching it out, for the sake of such a man as he was, I promise you, Joe, returned the woman, coolly. Don't drop that oil upon the blankets now. His blankets? asked Joe. Whose else's do you think? Replied the woman. He isn't likely to take cold without him, I dare say. He didn't die of anything catching, eh? Said old Joe, stopping in his work and looking up. Don't you be afraid of that, returned the woman. I ain't so fond of his company that I'd loiter about him for such things if he did. Ah, you may look through that shirt till your eyes ache, but you won't find a hole in it nor a threadbare place. It's the best he had, and a fine one, too. They'd have wasted it if it hadn't have been for me. What do you call wasting it? Asked old Joe. Putting it on him to be buried, to be sure, replied the woman with a laugh. Somebody was fool enough to do it, but I took it off again. If calico ain't good enough for such a purpose, it isn't good enough for anything. It's quite as becoming to the body. He can't look uglier than he did in that one. Scrooge listened to this dialogue in horror, as they sat grouped about their spoil in the scanty light afforded by the old man's lamp. He viewed them with a detestation and disgust which could not have been greater, though they had been obscene demons marketing the corpse itself. Ha ha, laughed the same woman, when old Joe, producing a flannel bag with money in it, told out their several gains upon the ground. This is the end of it, you see. He frightened everyone away from him when he was alive, to profit us when he was dead. Ha ha ha. Scrooge! Spirit, said Scrooge, shuddering from head to foot. I see. The case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. All right, so a couple of things about what's happening in the text, and just like one super gross note about what's happening historically. One, this is such a taboo what she has done. So first of all, the bed curtains we've seen several times, because the first two ghosts, he sees the first two ghosts when he is physically in the bed. And there's all this talk about like drawing the bed curtains, closing the bed curtains, opening all of them so he doesn't get surprised. Bed curtains, bed curtains, bed curtains. And we've also gotten a lot of details, especially in the first section, of what he's wearing. He wears a dressing gown, he wears this, he wears that. So this kind of creeps forward as we realize what's happening. And what's happening is that these people are selling the dead man's, which is actually Scrooge's. It's dead Scrooge's stuff. And that's a taboo that you shouldn't break. You know, that's a social taboo. But they're kind of excusing each other, right? You know, you're selling the teaspoons, you're selling, you know, buttons, whatever. But I can't remember if it's the laundress or the charwoman. But basically what this woman has done is horrifying even to the other people that are there to like sell the stolen goods, which is that she has not just stripped the bed curtains around the bed with the corpse lying in it. It's not just that she has stolen the blanket that's covering the dead person on the bed with the bed curtains, is that she has gone so far as to strip the corpse of the shirt on its back. So that's just so ghastly and so ghoulish that it even gives pause to the other people who are, you know, thieves and criminals and have stolen from the dead guy, which gives you an idea. But that reference that Scrooge has of like, it's so creepy to him that it is as creepy as though they had sold the corpse. That's a real thing. Like, that is a fear that people had. Corpses were dug up and stolen, or stolen before they ever had a chance to be buried, and then sold to medical schools for various mostly to study them, right? And people had enough of a fear of having their graves robbed that you can still find in cemeteries, like especially I actually saw some in person in Edinburgh, mort safes, which are basically like cages over your grave, in hopes of preventing grave robbers from getting in there and digging up your corpse and selling it. So this is a very creepy scene, but Scrooge's fear is even creepier than that, and also pretty shocking, because that's a legitimate fear for the time period. This is like in people's psyche. So on that very cheerful note, we will end this episode and pick it up next time.